We're all familiar with the eerie premise behind the Final Destination movies, where fate strikes without warning. A chain reaction of small, ordinary moments that spiral into something unthinkable. But as chilling as those scenes are, sometimes real life is even stranger. Let's take a look at 13 real-life moments when the unimaginable became reality. I'm sure you remember the scene in Final Destination at McKinley Speedway during the Megatech 300 Memorial Race. A screwdriver that was left in the back of a race car during a pit stop falls down onto the track. Another car runs it over, blows out its tire, and just like that, chaos erupts. Now, the real story I'm about to tell isn't quite as explosive, but it's still incredibly shocking. It happened at the South African Grand Prix in 1977. It was a hot March 5th afternoon at the Kyalami circuit, and the crowd was buzzing with excitement. British Formula One driver Tom Price was locked in the middle of the race. He was weaving through high-speed turns at nearly 170 miles an hour. The engines roared, the stands shook, and on the other side of the track, something was going terribly wrong. A car had caught fire, and that's when a 19-year-old volunteer fire marshal named Frederick Jansen van Vuren, he ran across the track carrying a heavy fire extinguisher, trying to reach that car that was on fire. Now, neither Price nor Vuren saw each other, but in the blink of an eye, their paths collided. The impact was instant. The extinguisher flew from Van Vuren's hands, and it struck Price's helmet. At that speed, the outcome was instantly tragic. And because the race was being broadcast live, millions of viewers watched it happen. They were stunned, silent, and unable to believe what they were seeing. Here's a story that could have been pulled straight from a Final Destination scene, if the movies had been made in the 1980s. It was a stormy night in May 1985. It was the kind of night where the thunder shakes the house, the rain hammers the windows, and flashes of lightning light up the sky every few seconds. Inside, 17-year-old Jason Findley was at home with his family. At some point in the evening, he stepped into a bedroom to make a phone call. And remember now, this was the 80s, so that means that the call was on a corded phone that plugged into the wall and had a long spiral cord hanging from it to the receiver. A few minutes passed, and then a family member went in to see Jason, and they found him lying on the bed. He was completely still, and the phone was laying on the bed by his head. There were no signs of injury, no burns, no marks, just silence. Paramedics were called, and doctors searched for answers, but no one could figure out what had happened. Later, experts suspected it might have been a power surge, one triggered by a lightning strike traveling through the phone line and reaching Jason at just the wrong moment. A professor from Columbia University explained it like this: lightning can cause a sudden spike in current through household wiring. Even if it's not strong enough to scorch a wire or fry a phone, it can still send dangerous surges through the line. Sometimes real life gets even darker than anything Hollywood ever imagined. Take what happened during the filming of Twilight Zone the movie. It was 2:20 a.m. on Friday, July 23, 1987. Director John Landis was shooting a Vietnam War scene, one where actor Vic Morrow was carrying two Vietnamese children across a shallow river. There were explosions going off all around them, and above them there was a helicopter that was hovering. But something went terribly wrong. One of the explosions hit the aircraft, causing the pilot to lose control, and within seconds, it crashed into the river where Morrow and the children were positioned for the shot. The children were just 6 and 7, and tragically, they should not have even been on that set. They reportedly had been hired off the books, which violated child labor laws. The accident sent shockwaves through Hollywood, leading to major changes in how stunts and safety are handled, especially when children are involved. This is the kind of thing that feels like it came straight out of Final Destination, but not because of the spectacle, but instead because of how everything lined up just wrong. One missed detail in the stunt, one bad decision, 1 second too late, and fate stepped in. Do you remember in Final Destination 5, when Dennis Latman meets a strange end thanks to something which most of us don't give a second thought to? A wrench. It falls into a belt sander and launches like a missile, hitting Dennis before he even knows what's coming. The real-life story of Dick Wertheim isn't nearly as dramatic, but like Dennis, it was an ordinary object that led to something tragic. Wertheim was a respected tennis official working the 1983 US Open when tragedy struck in a way that nobody could have imagined. During a match, a player launched a serve that struck Wertheim and knocked him off balance, sending him to the ground. And keep in mind that some pro serves clock in at over 100 miles an hour, so you can only imagine the kind of impact that he felt. Wertheim hit his head when he landed, and later he died from the complications related to the fall. Speaking of sports, 16-year-old Teddy Balkind had been playing hockey for years. He knew how to take a hit, how to bounce back up, and how to move fast on the ice. It was a regular high school game in 2022, the kind filled with noise and adrenaline and everything that makes hockey what it is. At one point during the game, Teddy fell to the ice. That's nothing unusual. It's a fast-paced, physical sport, and falling is just part of it. But this time, things didn't play out the way they usually did. The player behind Teddy couldn't stop in time, and in the chaos of the moment, with the blades cutting across the ice and players reacting on instinct, Teddy was seriously injured. Coaches and medics ran to him immediately, and he was taken to a hospital as quickly as possible. But despite their efforts, his injuries were too severe. It was the kind of freak accident that no one saw coming. One moment, he was in the game, doing what he loved, and the next moment, everything changed. The Final Destination movies have their fair share of wild car accidents, but even they don't have anything quite like this next story. It happened late one night in June 2011 on a long, winding stretch of Highway 93 just outside Yoho National Park in British Columbia. The sky was black. There were no streetlights, there was no traffic, just miles of forest on either side and the soft hum of tires on the pavement. In one car, there were two men. They were driving northbound. They were probably tired, maybe talking quietly, or maybe just listening to the radio. But out of nowhere, a large black bear came charging out of the woods and into the road, and they hit it head on. The impact launched the 440-pound animal into the air, sending it directly into the path of an SUV that was coming from the opposite direction. The bear crashed through the SUV's windshield, entering the car and then exiting out the back windshield. Inside the SUV were three people. Tragically, the 25-year-old driver and the backseat passenger did not survive. The front passenger somehow walked away with only minor injuries. Meanwhile, the two men in the first car, the ones who hit the bear, they walked away without a scratch. Authorities were stunned. A bear struck by a vehicle launched into another. It was the kind of chain reaction that defied logic, the kind of freak accident that felt almost too strange to be real. This next one might be one of the strangest drowning cases ever reported. Anthony Hensley was a 37-year-old working for a company that used swans and dogs to keep geese away from condo properties. On a Sunday morning in April 2012, he was out kayaking on a small retention pond checking on the swans. These birds were usually calm, but not that day. According to witnesses, one of the swans suddenly became aggressive. It charged the kayak and struck it, causing it to tip over, sending Anthony into the cold water. The swan didn't back off. It kept circling as Anthony fought to stay above the water. By the time help arrived, it was too late. He was taken to a nearby hospital, but sadly, he didn't make it. Authorities believe that he may have gotten too close to a nest, and swans are known to be territorial, but no one expected something like this. Sometimes you have to watch out for the most unexpected thing falling from above, like in Final Destination 4, when Jonathan Groves had a bathtub crash down on him. This next story falls right in line with that, only this time it wasn't fiction. Lester Harvey was a 58-year-old outdoorsman out on a hunting trip with friends in the Virginia woods. It was supposed to be an ordinary day, the kind of trip that he'd taken many times before. The men spotted a black bear and they managed to scare it up a tree. They waited below, keeping their distance and talking about what to do next. Eventually, as the group was preparing to move on, a shot was fired, and what happened next caught everyone off guard. The bear fell from the tree and landed directly on top of Lester. He was badly injured, and despite immediate efforts to help him and treatment at the hospital, his injuries were too severe to recover from. Here's another real-life story that starts with something falling. Have you ever heard of the phrase, wrong place, wrong time? In Buenos Aires, 1988, that phrase took on a meaning that no one could have imagined. It was a warm October afternoon, the kind of day where the sidewalks were busy, the sun was out, and everything felt ordinary. People were walking their dogs, running errands, and just going about their day. Then, in one unthinkable moment, a small poodle fell from a 13th floor balcony. No one knows exactly what happened, but what's certain is that it struck a 75-year-old woman who had been walking on the sidewalk below. The impact was devastating, and in a moment that still feels surreal, both the woman and the dog were killed instantly. As people rushed over and a crowd began to form, another woman stepped off the curb to get a closer look, just as a bus was passing by. She was struck before anyone could pull her back. And you'd think that would be the end of it, but this story had one final twist. A man who had witnessed the tragedies became overwhelmed and suddenly collapsed nearby. Paramedics arrived quickly and they did everything they could, but he never regained consciousness. This remains one of the most surreal chain reaction tragedies ever recorded. A series of events so bizarre, so perfectly mistimed that it almost felt scripted. A real-life domino effect that no one could have seen coming. Like Louis Romero in Final Destination 3, sometimes people tempt fate one too many times. Take the story of Toronto lawyer Gary Hoy. He worked on the 24th floor of a sleek downtown office building. The windows were a selling point, reinforced, secure, and supposedly unbreakable. And Gary, he made a habit of proving it. Whenever someone new joined the firm or stopped by for a tour, Gary would give them a little demonstration. He'd throw himself against the glass, full force, just to show that it wouldn't break. This was his thing, and every time he bounced right off. No cracks, no damage. On June 9th, 1993, Hoy showed the trick to a group of summer interns. The first time he did it, he hit the glass, it held, and he bounced off it, and the room laughed. But the second time he did it, something went horribly wrong. The glass didn't shatter, but the entire window pane came loose and it popped out of the frame, and Gary fell from the 24th floor to the courtyard below. Imagine dedicating your entire life to something, only for it to end in tragedy. Giacomo Chiapparini was a 74-year-old cheesemaker from northern Italy, known for running a massive aging warehouse filled with wheels of cheese. Each wheel weighed close to 90 pounds, stacked floor to ceiling on towering metal racks. One day in 2023, a single rack gave out, and that one failure set off a chain reaction. Within seconds, thousands of heavy cheese wheels came crashing down. The noise was so intense, the neighbors actually called the police. Emergency crews arrived and they searched for over 11 hours, eventually finding Giacomo beneath the collapsed racks and cheese. This next one is eerily similar to what happened to high school student Perry Malinowski in Final Destination 3. While at a carnival celebrating the graduating high school seniors, a horse that was tied to a flagpole was spooked by a firework, and as he got startled and jumped, he snapped the pole in half, and a piece of it launched through the air, striking Perry. Now, Perry's story might be fictional, but real life has moments that feel far too similar. Take the case of Lottie Belk. It was a windy afternoon in June 2016, and Lottie was at Virginia Beach with her family. They were celebrating both her birthday and her wedding anniversary. They were relaxing under the sun when a strong gust of wind swept across the shoreline. One of the beach umbrellas was ripped from its anchor in the sand and hurled into the air. It struck Lottie before anyone had time to react. She collapsed immediately, and paramedics arrived quickly and they did everything they could, but despite their best efforts, Lottie didn't survive. Let's close this out with a real-life story that mirrors one of the Final Destination franchise's most unforgettable scenes, the opening of Final Destination 2. You know the one. It's the lumber truck speeding down the highway when logs come loose and start tumbling into traffic. Now, here's the real-life version, and it's just as sudden and just as impossible to predict. DJ Kemi Alessania was riding in the passenger seat while her friend Jane Connolly drove down the highway. It was a normal drive and the day was clear. There were blue skies and dry roads. But then in an instant, Jane caught a flash in the corner of her eye, and then heard a loud bang and the shattering of glass. At first, Jane thought it was a rock. She stayed calm and told Kemi that she's going to pull the car over and call for help. When Kemi didn't answer, Jane looked over and her jaw dropped. It wasn't a rock that came through the window. It was a 10-pound chunk of reflective metal from the road that had somehow launched into the air, smashed through the windshield, and struck Kemi without warning. And there you have it, 13 real-life stories that feel like they were pulled straight from a Final Destination movie. Each one a reminder of just how strange, fragile, and unpredictable life can be. Which one of these stuck with you the most? And which one made you pause and think, that could have been me? Let me know in the comments. And, as always, thank you for watching Stories Beyond the Ordinary.